with Magic City Books. So thrilled to have you back here with us for our ongoing virtual author series, which we have been doing for about a year now. We're probably approaching 150 of these virtual events that we've done in that time, and it's been a really great way to stay connected with all of you. Of course, this is National Poetry Month, and can't think of a better way to close out the month of events with this special evening that we have for you tonight. I will tell you about a couple of things coming up. This next 2 months really have tons of stuff. Even this week we have 4 or 5. I won't go individually and tell you about everything, but I would encourage you to go to our website and see what we have coming. I will make special note of the fact that as we approach the end of May into June and the 100th centennial, or the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, we're going to be doing a pretty broad series of events around that event. We have everything from events with Don Lemon from CNN. We're going to be doing the book launch for Scott Ellsworth, who wrote kind of one of the first books about that several decades ago, Death in a Promised Land, a book about the Second Amendment and its kind of history in relation to racial politics and all kinds of different things in between. So definitely check those out on our website. And then into the spring. People ask when we're going to be doing real in-person events again. I hope soonish. We're going to maybe try some outdoor things this summer, and hopefully by late summer into the early fall, we can be kind of getting back into whatever that space looks like again. But we certainly can't wait to see you all in person. Tonight's going to be a really special event. And I'm also thrilled anytime that I can be an audience member like all of you and sit back and enjoy the program. And that's only happens when we have a guest moderator with us. And tonight we have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce her first. Jennifer Forrester was born in Colorado and educated at the Institute of Fine Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the Vermont College of Fine Arts. She's the author of the poetry collections Bright Raft in the Afterweather and Leaving Tulsa. She is a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation of Oklahoma and the daughter of a diplomat. She grew up all around the world, but spent her summers right here in Jinx, Oklahoma. She was a former Wallace Stegner Fellow, has received fellowships from Soul Mountain Retreat, the Naropa Summer Writing Program, the Idlewild Summer Poetry Program, and various others. And she teaches at the Rainier Writing Workshop and lives in San Francisco. Really excited to have Jennifer Forrester joining us tonight, and not just as moderator, but as one of the contributors of this really fantastic new anthology called Living Nations, Living Words, an anthology of First Peoples poetry, which was edited by the 23rd United States Poet Laureate and our good friend Joy Harjo. It's a wonderful new collection that, like I said, features not only Jennifer, but Layli Long Soldier, Natalie Diaz, a lot of amazing poets that you're going to be hearing about tonight. And the foreword for the collection was actually written by Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress there at the Library of Congress. On kind of a personal note, it's always a great thrill to do a program with Joy, and to, we're kind of neighbors, we share a space, her being one of the Tulsa Artist Fellows, and has been so kind to us, making us kind of the official bookstore on her website, and has driven so many people around the world to come get books from Magic City, and that's been a hugely great thing. And also just joined our advisory board, so really a privilege for us. But I'm going to sit back tonight, enjoy a conversation with Jennifer and Joy. You guys have one job. That's to get a copy of this book or more if you'd like to read it more than once or give it to somebody else. And also to ask some questions. We want to hear from you. Just put those in the Q&A and we'll get to a few of those during the conversation. We'll post links to buy the book in the chat as we go, just to remind you, sometimes those get buried. We want to make sure you see that, but click on that and make it easy on yourself to get a copy of this beautiful new collection. But without any further ado, I want to welcome Jennifer as our guest moderator, and a very special welcome to the United States Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo. Thank you both, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and to be here with you, Joy, to talk about this magnificent book, Living Nations, Living Words, which is coming out on May 5th, I believe.
May 4th.
May 4th, yeah. So very soon, very soon. It's a beautiful book. And I thought it might be a good way to start talking about it by hearing some of your introduction.
Yes, I'll do that. This is an anthology, basically, of 47 contemporary Native poets. And I think I'll read the introduction to give you a better context. And so the very first maps were drawn into the earth with stick or stone implements. They told us where we lived, the location of food, water, and danger. Some were star maps of the heavens, histories notched and painted, or symbols of stories that gave directions on how to live. The earliest indigenous maps of North America were not drawn. The placement and orientation of a village, its buildings, and even mound structures were markers that mirrored the meaning of the heavens or other directional senses. Even a basket could be a map or a song. We carry maps of destiny in our poems. One of the earliest existing maps, known as Imago Mundi, is a cuneiform tablet of the Babylonian world, estimated to be from the 6th century BCE. The map shows Babylon on the Euphrates River, surrounded by other nations. What I appreciate most is the language of the text that accompanies the map. One region is described as "the winged bird ends not his flight." Another is "the light is brighter than that of sunset or stars," or "where a horned bull lives and attacks the newcomer." See, I wish we had things like that on our maps. Phrases. When I started my term as the 23rd U.S. Poet Laureate, I immediately began considering a signature project. As the first Native Nations Poet Laureate, I was aware that indigenous peoples of our country are often invisible or not seen as human. Or we are known from false images and narratives carried over from the vitriol of New England Puritans, the New England Puritan, Cotton Mather, and others who imagined us as demonic heathens, not capable of civilized and ordered thought and action. You will rarely find us in the cultural storytelling of America, and we are nearly non-existent in the American Book of Poetry. For my project, I conceived the idea of mapping the United States based on the poetry of Native Nations poets. I liked the idea of mapping America by poetry with poets. This anthology includes the poets and poems featured in the online mapping project. These are representative poets from locations across the country. Each poet chose their poem based on the theme of place and displacement, and with 4 touch points in mind: visibility, persistence, resistance, and acknowledgment. They also chose where they wish to place themselves, where they currently live, in their homelands, or where they feel most rooted. In the digital project, you can see the map and the poets' locations, read their poems, and hear them recite and comment on their poems. Native roots run deep. Native roots run deep, even when people are relocated, as are many Native nations in this country. One of the best known relocation projects is the Trail of Tears, which removed the Cherokee, Muskogee Creek, Seminole, Choctaw, Chickasaw from homelands in the southeast to Indian Territory, which we know as present-day Oklahoma. Like those in other communities, we travel far from home for work, opportunity, or love. You will find some of the poets living far from their homelands, and like Jennifer here, who lives in San Francisco, and but her mother's family is from the predominant Perryman family, who lived in Jinx at the outside Tulsa. Yet Jennifer's roots go back to Georgia and Alabama. And there are poets who stay close to home, like Henry Reelbird of the Crow Nation, who grew up on his reservation speaking his native language. He started out as a bronc writer, but an injury during his college years began his journey from the demanding physicality of bronc writing to what he has called the spiritual world of writing. There are other considerations while making the map. When editing or curating any Native Nations project, the question always arises: who is indigenous? We have chosen to allow tribal nations to define who is a tribal member. It is not up to us to be the arbitrators. There are many other Native Nations poets, from more than 574 federally recognized Native nations, and other legitimate state-recognized tribal entities who deserve to be included. And so I want to say one thing there is that my original concept was to have all the Native, let's put all the indigenous nations poets on this map. From contemporary, we can do contemporary, but why not all of them from, and have these timelines on a map. But then I thought, okay, we can put all American poets on here because we all get influenced by each other. Our worlds are not isolated. We come through as a generation. There's generations of poets, and there's a kind of a cross pollination that goes on, even tribally. Like when I started writing poetry, I was learning Navajo language because I was living in New Mexico and got special permission to take Navajo as my foreign language requirement. So there's a lot of native cross-cultural stuff that happens, sharing that happens, as well as with African American, Asian American, Irish, all kinds. So can you imagine a map like that? Well, there's a wonderful crew at the Poetry and Literature Center at the Library of Congress. Who worked closely in putting this together is Rob Casper, Anya, what's Anya's last name? And then Ann Holmes, and plus the others in the Library of Congress. But I remember the three of us sitting there thinking, the four of us, including me, thinking about this project and talking about, I'd visited the geography department and got excited about a map. And I said, and this is what I want to do. And it's like, capacity, capacity, because they weren't just, like all of us, we all have full-time work. But I still like thinking of that map. But we wound up with 47 contemporary indigenous nations poets here. And so this book is kind of one outgrowth of the map. Where the map is online. Anyone can access it. It could be used in literature classes, social studies classes, geography classes. What's exciting is that the map it's just a map of the earth. I say the sky, the earth and water, and I always say sky because I can see the sky on the map, and implied there. And there's no border between Mexico and the U.S. That's a rather recent invention. There is no border between Canada and the U.S. It's one body. And I always remember that Bolivian Indian woman standing up at a meeting in 1990 in a native village outside Ecuador, a meeting that of native nations from the Arctic all the way to Tierra del Fuego to talk about the Colombian quincentenary. And I remember she stood up and said, "Why do you call yourself America? We are all America. This is one person. She is America. And, she's the body. We are part of that body." So I always remembered that. So in organizing this map, I was thinking it's not really organized around geography. I mean, it's there. When you see the map online, you can tell that it's a body, and the voices emerge just like our voices do. Our voices emerge from place. Everyone comes from a place, even New York City, even everyone. There's a root, there's a place you took your breath, and maybe you were moved right away, but place figures so intrinsically into the way we think, the way we move about in the world, and so on. So it's divided between East or becoming, and so some of the poets aren't necessarily from the East, but their poems have to do with Eastern matters. And so it's kind of, there's a horizontal line, sort of like laying out a map. There's kind of a horizontal field and a vertical field. So you go across from east. I got to figure out, okay, from east to north, south, and then to west. So you have already, you're kind of setting up a different kind of mapping that is still, still a map. Let's see. So the poems fit into those ways in different kinds, into that structure in different kinds of ways. So this book is like the companion to the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I put a link to the online map in the chat box if anyone can see it and wants to go there after this. It was made with, it was ArcGIS Story Maps, which is really an amazing program. And Ann Holmes and the Library of Congress really helped, work with that platform to get this material up there. And I remember at the beginning of the project, since this is the signature Poet Laureate project, and every Poet Laureate is asked to do a particular project that will only be theirs, will kind of identify their term as U.S. Poet Laureate. And I remember those early conversations with you about, what an overwhelming, but absolutely essential project this could be and should be in order to gather everyone's stories. And of course, it's impossible to gather everyone's stories, but if we gather a few, then we're just beginning or opening doorways. And it's interesting to think about the other. So during your term as Poet Laureate, you also worked on another anthology that came out last August, When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through. So 2 anthologies 1 year is pretty spectacular. That's a lot of work. I was grateful to help with the editing of When the Light of the World Was Subdued anthology, and thinking about, we talked a lot, all the 18 contributing editors for that anthology talked a lot about maps and how the work would be laid out. And that one is very focused on where the author is born and where their tribal community is. And we did struggle a lot with people who move around a lot or are multinational, have several tribes that they're members of, and all of that. And so it's really interesting to see that version. And of course, that covers several hundred years of work, and this is all very contemporary. But to see the map become fluid in a different kind of way, and when you look at the map online, yeah, like Joy said, you just see colors, you see shapes, you kind of scroll through it and these people pop up. You can click on it and listen to the poet read the poem and talk about the poem. And again, it's only 47, it's just a few, but our hope is that it opens doorways and encourages other communities too to make a story map like this. A lot of urban groups are doing this, and tribal communities on their own, making their own story maps. So it's an exciting project to see where it can go.
Yes, there's also going right now. We're at work on a teacher's toolkit, and we're partnering with I think the National Indian Education Association and the National Council of Teachers of English for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going to be something where it can be available to all teachers, and there's a good rollout plan to make it available to teachers, especially for the fall semester, to be able to use the book in their classrooms for teaching at any age, really, and using poetry as a jumping off point for students to write their own poems, but at the same time to also learn about the diversity of Native people. So that's going to be a really powerful project when that comes out, and it will be available to all the teachers.
You can actually use poems to talk about government policy. I remember once years ago during I didn't teach a class. I went and taught one class. I was invited in. I was an invited guest in the Harvard Law for a native law class in winter term, and I came in and used poems to talk about federal policy, federal Indian policy. Because there's so much history. It's like even some poems probably have maps. Like, okay, here's a poem in itself can be a map. You've got the title, which says, okay, this is where we are, or maybe this is where we're going. This is the doorway. and each line is building a kind of direction in a map. And by the time you get to the end of it, it depends. Some people really don't want you to get anywhere in particular. Some because it's more about idea or theory, and others or comment on how time moves in the ordinary world, or other poems want to take you into a place that is ineffable and sublime. Each poem you could almost see each poem as a kind of map.
Yeah, it would be, it's amazing to think of how much further we, had we the resources and time to show the poem and then show the poem's ancestors and the poem's influences, how the poem came to be, what poems it is going to generate, because they're always traveling, these poems. And there's another aspect of this that I wanted to ask you about or talk about, with this kind of multidimensional project, with the book as kind of the companion to the online piece, and the teacher toolkit coming out to help teachers learn how they can engage their students or their classrooms with this map in a meaningful way, or with the book. Joy, you also wanted to do a significant amount of outreach in your third term. You've been appointed a third term of U.S. Poet Laureate, which is only the second person ever to have 3 terms. And so one of your ideas for the next year is to help bring this book and this project out into the community. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what we've done is convened some Native poets who were active in their communities to think of, come up with ways to take the project into probably, I don't know how many communities, because I can't do everything, but but to take the book out into the communities and the project, and also to hold events like readings with Native poets, so that people can hear and see the work of Native poets in this country. And it won't be just the poets in the books; it'll be Native poets, in those communities that we land on.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, I'm always traveling. Now it's been virtually, but it's going to start up. And I always try to engage with communities wherever I go. So that's ongoing. But yes, the third term starts September, and it will end. There's the last week of the term is the last week of April 2022. And I've been inviting everybody to that last week in DC. There'll be Native poets reading, and maybe a dance party, and
A big party.
yes,
Lots of music and dancing.
yeah,
I can't wait. Should we read a few poems from the book?
yes, let's do that. So I guess what I can start with is Elise Passion's poem. Now Elise is from, I wonder where she probably placed herself, I'm trying to remember, in Chicago.
I believe she did. I'll look.
Yeah.
I'll look here. Let's see.
Elise is Osage. I gotta find her poem. I don't have the page number here.
In the first section.
I got it. Yes, she's Osage, and is the author of The Nightlife, Bestiaria, Infidelities, and Houses Coast. She's edited numerous poetry anthologies and teaches in the MFA program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And she's an enrolled Osage member. And will be coming into town at some point. She did an event, yes, at Magic City Books about a little over a year ago for the eloquent poem. I think that's what it's called. This is her poem, Heritage. So her mother, just FYI for this poem, was a Maria Tallchief. So she's Maria Tallchief's daughter. I think it's cool that a dancer gave birth to a poet. This is Elise Passion's poem. And this is number 10 in a series. The year my mother was born, in Fairfax, Oklahoma, white men were marrying Osage women and killing them for their head rights. My mother was born a year after the Indian Citizenship Act was passed. Indians tied to the US for or against their wills. 3 years before her birth, her half-sister, baby Ruth's grave was dynamited with nitroglycerin by outlaws, scavenging for diamonds and gold buried inside the casket. In the Tall Chief plot, I wander through family history, the marble monuments, angelic statues measuring each step on grass, memorizing photographs. This one of a striking beauty, my great-grandmother, Eliza Big Heart Tall Chief, 1870 to 1962, surviving her husband by 50 years, the widow, the adored grandmother of my mother. Eliza, only now do I see my name, a permutation of hers. At home in Chicago, every day I pass family photographs framed on walls. My great-grandfather's oval sepia portrait of his boyish face, replicated on the headstone. Instead of the young bride, here is Eliza, a tribal elder, wrapped in a multicolored blanket, standing outside her front porch, a photo taken after all those years. She outlived him.
I love how that poem is, it's inspiring to imagine writing poems to our own family photographs. You know, I can, and how much we know and don't know from the family photographs that we have. Such a beautiful poem. I can really, the four themes that you asked the poets in the anthology to speak to, or, you know, find a poem that addressed were visibility, persistence, resistance. Was that the third one?
Resilience.
Resilience and acknowledgement. And when we were putting the teacher toolkit together, looking through all the poems and seeing which ones speak to a particular theme, I feel like all the poems in the book speak to all the themes in some way, you know, because they're really inseparable. Resilience is visibility. Visibility is acknowledgement, acknowledging where we come from, where we're going, who we're related to, and persisting with those stories by putting them in telling the stories through a poem. That was beautiful.
So Jennifer, are you going to read one of your poems?
I'll read the poem that I have in this. I'll read the poem, and then I'll also read the little narrative that I have on the recording. You can also, on the website, you can also see the text of the poem. So actually, I'll read the narrative first, and then I'll read the poem. Okay, I am a multicultural, multi-geographic person. I am a citizen of two nations, the United States and the Muskogee Creek Nation. I am also the daughter of a military diplomat and grew up moving between 4 countries. Engaging with multicultural inheritances is, I believe, necessary work for our country at large. As a citizen of 2 nations, I believe that citizenship is a responsibility and requires participation, willingness to learn and be of service, accountability within the collective, and respectful, conscious inclusion of the collective's diversity. Weaving Muskogee language and cultural, geopolitical, and ecological history into my understanding of poetics is, for me, a necessary part of this personal and cultural accountability. Through my father's family, I am German and Dutch. Growing up for many years in Europe, I had the opportunity to learn these languages and go to these homelands where the cultural symbols of lifeways continue, both in the deep culture and on the national surface. But in returning to the US, where was my language and homeland? It is here, no doubt, and it is flourishing, but not on the national surface. It is still too often defined by languages that attempt to destroy it. I learned very young that my indigenous American heritage was one of displacement, that while I was from Oklahoma, that was still not our homelands. When I began to look for my Muskogee and Hitchiti Dalwa in the South, I knew I would have to follow invisible maps. The landscape has changed The surfaces of our histories have been written over. But poetry is a different kind of map, a wayfinding that doesn't care for surfaces. There is a Muskogee story that tells of the tie snake and how a town, once a major chiefdom center of the Mississippian era, was swallowed up by water and is now remembered by the sound of its name, Coosa, sung by the only two cranes that could cross the entire lake without vanishing into its center. The tie snake lives in the center of lakes and ponds and occasionally emerges to show its rainbow-colored, bejeweled horns. Often it is said that the tie snake is lonely, and people swimming in these lakes risk being pulled under into the oblivion of the tie snake's underworld. The tie snake is neither snake nor human. It lives in the liminal, just barely visible. As a kid on my grandparents' farm in Jinx, I liked to take the rowboat across the pond, following the shimmer of scales slipping across and under the water's surface. Snakes lived there too, waiting to pull me under. I was afraid of the water, but drawn to it. Writing poetry for me is like crossing the pond, trying to see the way to the invisible in the center of a water source. Maybe poetry is an approach to the center of the lake, where one must never go, where one could disappear, abducted into the underworld by the very mystery one seeks in the crossing. So the poem I included here is entitled Notes from Coosa. I find you nowhere that is here or there. Below the sunken Yuchi path, iron ore. The ridge dividing water, veined with it. Pea vine, wiregrass, shortleaf hickory. Old fields, floodplains, indigo dyed. When the woods were still dense, saw palmetto, grapes of the hills destroyed by fire, and the haw chestnut by the hatchet. If it were easy to leave our bodies in the fork of Red River, 2 mounds of earth. If it were easy to leave you behind in a stream clear with flowering stones, to find you in the language where I lost you, as if you were a sentence in this poem, an archive of the forest. But I've burned the remaining pine. On the bluffs, strawberries thinly scattered, and in the old beaver ponds, briar root, a bread made of it for times of famine. I had a visitation from the cat.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Jennifer. Thanks for that introduction. See, all of the poets have such introductions about addressing place in their poems. They weren't including in the anthology. I almost wish they were.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we have any questions out there? I don't
see any questions yet.
That's very unusual.
I
I've
know.
been doing 3 or 4 a day, and usually there's all kinds of questions.
Unless I'm missing them, but I don't see any. So we are waiting for your questions. Otherwise, we can keep reading poems.
Okay. Why don't I read Anita Andrezi's poem? Okay. And here it is. She's a wonderful artist too. I've known Anita for years and years. She's Yaqui, Pima, and Maya, as well as Slovenian, German, and Italian. Her most recent book of poetry, Enigma, was published in 2019. This is called 13 Ways of Looking at an Indian. 1. Among 20 Indians, only one has skin as coppery as a penny, and she sprayed it on. 2. If you're a half-breed, you're always of 2 minds, but your heart is red. 3. Coyote whirls and dust devils grinning in the heat of our heart of our stories. I guess it could be grinning in the heat, but she means grinning in the heart of our stories. 4. A man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman and a woman are one. A human and coyote are troubled. 5. I don't know which I prefer, Native American, Indian, skins, or sly innuendos from Coyote as he saunters down the street whistling, Yo, mamacita, you bad honey. 6. I grew up white, but Coyote's shadow is moody, dark twin to mine. I grew up half white, sorry, but Coyote's shadow is moody, dark twin to mine. 7. Oh, non-native Indians, why do you exterminate Coyote? Hang his pelt on barbed wire, string his ears on your belts. Do you not see how Coyote is part of the land? The dreaming and scheming of thought into existence. Without Coyote, America would be a reservation of flat jokes and fizzled life. 8. I grew up in Southern California where rivers are cement troughs and coyotes sang from Hollywood Hills. My aunts wouldn't say they were Yaqui because that meant death or slavery in Sonora, so they were Mexican with indigenous rhythm. 9. When the conquistadors came, or the priests, or the pilgrims, or Walmart, we ran away. We ran in circles from death in one land to death in another. And Coyote was always there, holding our souls in the depths of his howl. 10. At the smell of smudged sage at the powwow, the white cop sniffed sharply, looking for some Indian smoking weed. 11. I tried riding in a canoe and almost tipped over. Horses scare me. My car has scars along its flanks from spatial misjudgments as I back out of the garage. My kind of Indian is self-defined. It's whatever I do, however I do it, and I'm not scared of who I am. Fry bread is a recent 12. Fry bread is a recent tradition. Corn is older and part of my DNA. Corn is sacred, pollen flying into a world turned golden like Coyote's fur. And finally, 13. Today lasted centuries. Coyote sits next to me, whispering promises of survival. Mañana, it is tomorrow and will always be tomorrow. Stars shine all day, forever, and we don't see them. Our souls, whether white or Indian or other, shine even longer. There are more than 13 ways of seeing anyone. That's Anita's.
That's so good. Hearing that, it's just, I've read it several times, but hearing it read out loud, it's even better.
It's
I love
really
that.
different. Yeah, it's really different. You occupy a poem, or it
Mhm.
occupies you more by reading it aloud.
Yeah.
I was noticing that.
Yeah, the humor, is such awesome humor. But there's really beautiful, serious moments. What was that? The stars shine all day and we don't see them.
We have a question from Nan Jackson, who had written in earlier to Magic City wanting me to read this poem in Muskogee, but we're not on that collection right now. But there are many poems in non-English native languages. So, but the problem is I can't read the language that Tana Autumn with Ophelia. Yeah, she's a wonderful language person and has helped many, get their, programs in bilingualism, and she's a wonderful poet, Ophelia Zapata.
Mm-hmm.
I can't read her poem and I can't read her language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, her poem in the anthologies in Tono Autumn, and then the English translation. She has a whole book of poems in Tono Autumn.
Hmm.
It's incredible.
That's a good question. And a lot of these people, or sometimes they read them. I was looking, Imai Kalani Kalahele, I knew when I was in Hawaii, and to hear him read, it might be in English, but it's in pidgin. You can
Mhm.
hear him speak pidgin English, so English shifts. It can shift according to place and the speaker. There's Lucy Tapahanzo is here. She writes often in Navajo, and I think her poem has Navajo phrases in it.
Mm.
She's done this. Yeah, she's got. Yeah, there's a little Navajo in here, which I can kind of read, but my Navajo pronunciation has deteriorated since I haven't used it through the years.
Mm.
But
We have another question here
okay.
from Jimmy Pickett. Joy, thanks for naming the truth of the word America. I have found few who are willing to name this truth. Do you think we must name this truth if there is any hope of approaching what is euphemistically labeled as the, quote, immigration problem?
Well, I go back to the map and the idea of mapping, which in a way helps promote an idea. I mean, it's a map, the map for this project, there are no boundaries. And so many of those, and Leslie Silko talked about it precisely, and in Almanac of the Dead, about these migration paths that went all the way up to the Americas. They went back and forth. This was before these fenced boundaries were put in, saying, or even, you know, we were just talking about Ophelia Zepeda's people, who their nation straddles U.S. Mexico. There are like nations north, you know, that tribal nations that, you know, those lines were not there. And so I think about that and how, yeah, there's, I mean, where do I start?
Yeah.
So many of the people going at, you know, at the borders, they're indigenous people, you know, being kept. These are migrations of people that have gone on long before there was a country called America.
Yeah. I think one of the powerful things poetry can do is transcend those boundaries. It allows us to speak within and through them, even if we're using boundaries like language, and other people may not understand the language something is in. There's still the rhythm and the music of the piece to carry the spirit of the poem or the story across the boundary of language so that it can be accessible to anyone. Even visually, if you look at a poem on the page, like Ophelia's poem, and may not know how the words are pronounced, even just seeing the letters on the page, a different kind of alphabet and different word letter combinations, is so illuminating to all the possibilities of comprehension. And just understanding that, the possibilities of comprehension, can help us understand each other better, or at least open our hearts to trying. And I think poetry can do that. Should we read another poem?
Yes.
I have one.
You were going to read one by Bearhart?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite poems in the book, so I wanted to read this one. B. William Bearhart, he's from St. Croix, Chippewa of Wisconsin. He graduated from the Institute of American Indian Arts MFA program in Santa Fe. I met him once with the poet Natalie Diaz, and we were on our way back from Standing Rock, actually, and had a nice meeting with him. It was so kind. He was a poker dealer in a small Wisconsin casino when he was not writing or editing. He died this past year in 2020 during the production of this work. And his work endures in this collection of living poets. And so we're so grateful to have one of his poems in this book, and also an explanation he wrote that's recorded. So I'll read his recording and then the poem. My name is B. William Bearhart, and I'll be reading the poem Transplant after Georgia O'Keeffe's Pelvis 4, 1944. Okay, so let's take this way back, an oversimplification of a migration story. The Ojibwe people migrated westward from the eastern shores of this continent. The destination was to settle where food grows on the water. Of course, this history is more complex, but we carry this history, this movement, with us in our everyday lives, just like we were saying right now about migrations. While this is not explicit in the poem I chose for this project, it does exist as a knowledge I carry to the page in terms of place and displacement. Transplant is the migration story of a woman from Wisconsin to New Mexico, as well as the story of a kidney from one body to the next. What does place mean? Is it where we start, where we end? This poem wonders about the precariousness of life, how forgiving and unforgiving it can be. It's about the resiliency and delicate nature of our bodies. It's about how we carry the weight of stories and still have the capacity to build new possibilities. I thought that was such a beautifully written statement.
Yeah, I remember that statement. It's wonderful.
And so much of it was about migrations and the migrations of even our bodies among other bodies and our stories. So this is the poem Transplant after Georgia O'Keeffe's Pelvis 4, 1944. Wolves have two stomachs. I only have one. Inside their den, regurgitation of skeleton, and then another. There is quiet now in our hospital rooms. Ventilator's tail pulled from electrical socket. Parents weep a lake. A sky and moon, too, they weep a pelvis. It hangs in a museum. I steal your hip bone, tuck it deep inside my pocket. Where else does a love note fit if not next to a groin? The hip's eye blue nests a moon. I disguise myself from God. Black-robed messenger, two buzzards fight for a kidney. Your mother writes, he never met a stranger. O'Keeffe in the desert, her pilgrimage, a transplant, long after the buzzards and wolves have left. Two pictures of your strangerless face in the post, two blue eyes, spring starflowers harvested from God's garden. Organs reaped from a body I didn't sow, such porcelain gifts a fragile body sows. I ingest dissolvable moons so that we become strangers, two skeletons of different stomachs, one lost in the desert, the other a planet, a god. A wolf swallows his own rib to rebuild all of us.
Well, I could hang out in that poem for a while.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's so powerful. We have a question. This is from Diane. Would there be a nonprofit who could find funding via the foundation centers and local, state, and federal government to provide these books free of charge to schools on reservations, or free books to Indigenous people in urban centers with high numbers of Indigenous North Americans? What are your thoughts and feelings about this possibility, please?
Oh, we've talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things we want to do once the anthologies makes, we start getting funding from that. We would like to help, get these books, these anthologies out to the communities who can't afford them or need them for students.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in some of our outreach work next year, that's what we're intending and hoping to do, is that everyone we're communicating with and working with will have a copy of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And with the other anthology, When the Light of the World Was Subdued, that's the plan once, permissions and some income starts coming in from it, that all of that will go towards supporting Native literature projects and getting that anthology in the hands of people.
Yeah, so all of the I guess all of the from the sales of this book, I think it goes back into Library of Congress to help produce other books. I think especially with native subjects, and all of the proceeds from When the Light of the World Was Subdued, our songs came through, goes back to native communities, native poetry projects, and so on.
Yeah. We have a question from Illa or Isla. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. Age 10, watching with my mom. What advice do you have for young poets, Joy?
Oh, well, one, just to have a good time. I would just write. It's, what really blew it away open for me is when I realized that I could write about anything that I wanted. I could write about, and I could imagine things to write about. And I could use language. The other thing is I could use language the same way I use color and line as an artist, because I used to do paint before I became a poet.
Mhm.
And that can open it up quite a bit, and just be who you are. Don't judge yourself, and just enjoy. When I write poetry, I mean, sometimes I sit down, I don't know what's going to happen, but I get involved in the making of it, and that's thrilling. I always find out something I didn't know, or and that's where I go. I don't want to go to what I've heard over and over again.
Mhm.
So that's my advice. What about you, Jennifer?
Well, one thing I learned so much from you, Joy, constantly, is that the artwork, the story, the poetry, the song comes from a kind of like fun place or an open place, and thinking about how so many of your poems end up becoming songs, and then they go back into poems, and you have your 7th album of music out, I Pray for My Enemies, which just came out in March. And that's, I can see the dancing between the poem and the song, and how all of that music comes together to create like an immersive experience. And I think poetry at its best is immersive, meaning you get your whole body into it. And it's got to be something that is, felt in the body. That's something I learned from you about your work. And it would also be my advice too, is like, turn off the brain, turn off the mind, let the poem happen first in the body, and then maybe sound or rhythm. So that would be my advice. But Joy, do you want to say a little bit about your album before we end here?
Yes, it's I pray for my enemies. I was thinking of the poem Remember, so we don't have time to play it here, but if you listen, you can pull that poem up, I'm sure, on the internet, and you can buy the album at Magic City Books has the albums, and it's getting radio play all over the world. I just got a new radio list. It's in Australia and England, all over the US. I just did interviews last night in Tampa. But there's a poem in there, especially for you, about, it's called Remember. And I wrote that when I was first writing poetry. I was asked to write a poem for younger people, what they needed to know, and that's when I wrote that poem, Remember. You can find that on that album.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. Well, it seems like we're reaching towards the end of the hour. We have one last question here, asking about the beaded piece behind you, Joy.
Yes, this years ago I got to go to the National Museum of the American Indian. They have it's not a warehouse, it's a place where they have many of their collections. And I photographed some of the Muskogee Creek pieces, and this is of course a larger blown up version of a piece of our beadwork. And I like all the plant designs. You can see that they're plant designs, and it reminds me that most of the designs we have in the world are derived from plant and animal elements, if you think about it.
Yeah.
The natural lines are, what's almost everything. I mean, we reimagine shapes and so on, but so anyway, that's what it's from.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love those designs, and looking at them is so inspiring. The little circles and the leaves, you can see all of those designs in nature.
And
Oh,
they're
yeah.
up close. They're really up close. There's an image going around. I need to copy it so I can put it up here so you could see it, of a cell, of a single cell. That looks like it looks like this amazing painting with energy and all kinds of things going on, and it looks like a thought field. That's what it looks like to me. It's quite amazing. And I look at this old beadwork, and it's like, that's kind of there's an insight into the energetic level of the plant.
Yeah. We have one last question here from Honey Novik. I've been a huge fan since I first heard she had some horses. Since then, I've always wanted to ask, what would you like your poetry to say or do? I am edified by your poetry. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you for those words. I think the poetry, I don't direct it as to what it's going to say. I think it's a teacher. The poems teach me. I go into that space and I do my work. I take down what I'm hearing, and different moments find their way in, gestures and so on, and images, and I kind of make a place. I think of myself hammering together a little house or an envelope or a place for the spirit of a poem to live. That's how I think about. Sometimes, other times, it's, some poems come relatively quick, and other poems I worked on a poem all summer once. I had a huge folder of drafts and it never came together.
Oh, do you still have those drafts?
I don't know, but I think it was called Gravity, and it never, there was no gravity in it. I tried and tried.
It's still floating out there in space.
It's something like that. And she had some horses just kind of, as the rhythm took over. I'm very rhythm oriented. And yeah, but thank you for that. Thank you for that. And anyone that's our last question?
That's our last question I see. There's let's see, maybe one more. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Joy and Jennifer, for sharing your beautiful and meaningful poetry. Well, thank you so much. I think this anthology is just a delight. It's full of so many cool poems. It's not overwhelming. It's 47 poets, 47 poems, and just takes you in so many different places on emotional, spiritual, and a kind of intellectual level. There's so much discussion that we could have about it. So I really look forward to it coming out.
Well, let's go out on I'll Play Remember from the album.
Okay, that sounds great.
And for the young woman who was watching with her mother, okay. And called Remember, and there's the incredible oud player, he's playing Rahim Al-Haj from Iraq, who I met in Albuquerque.
Remember the sky you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon, know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn. That is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. Your evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father. He is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember that you are all people, and all people are you. Remember, you are this universe, and this universe is you. Remember, 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 remember. Remember the sky, remember the earth. this earth is you. Remember,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Magic City Books, and Jennifer. You're the best, Jennifer Forrester.
Thank you,
And,
Joy.
yeah. And thank you, everyone who's supported poetry and native poetry and thinking and listening and the arts. So thank you.
Yeah. Good night.
And Magic City Books. Mado, thank you so much, everybody. Good night.